Evening, friends. Draw near the warmth, for the tale we spin tonight begins in the heart of a forge, where fire and steel meet, much like the often fiery, unyielding spirit of the West itself. But this isn't just a story of hot metal and hard labor. It's a story about the shaping of lives, about finding purpose in unexpected places, about how a talent, like a hidden vein of ore, can lie dormant until a knowing hand, or perhaps a desperate need, brings it to light. We're heading to a raw-boned mining town in the Montana Territory, a place called Stonebridge, where fortunes were sought in the earth. But sometimes, the truest treasures were found in the most overlooked corners, like in the heart of a young orphan boy, and the gruff, solitary blacksmith who reluctantly took him in. It's about how a shared craft, a common fire, can forge a bond stronger than any steel, and build a home where none was expected. The clang of Ben Cutler's hammer on the anvil was the first sound to greet the dawn in Stonebridge, and often the last to fade as dusk settled over the rugged, timbered peaks that cradled the town. Cutler's smithy, a solid log structure with a wide, open front, stood at the edge of the bustling mining camp, its chimney perpetually breathing a plume of acrid coal smoke. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hot iron, sweat, and quenched metal, a symphony of hisses, clangs, and the rhythmic roar of the bellows. Ben Cutler himself was a man forged from the same unyielding material as the tools he shaped. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face perpetually smudged with soot, his arms corded with muscle from decades of wielding the hammer. He was a man of few words, his expression usually as grim and unreadable as the iron he worked. He'd arrived in Stonebridge years ago, a solitary figure with a past he never spoke of, and built his smithy, his reputation, on skill, honesty, and an almost obsessive dedication to his craft. He shoed horses, repaired wagons, sharpened miners' picks and drills, forged tools and household implements, the essential, unglamorous work that kept the boomtown functioning. He was respected for his skill, but not particularly liked. He kept to himself, his manner gruff, his patience thin, especially with fools or idlers. His heart, folks whispered, was as hard as the steel he tempered. Into this solitary, demanding world stumbled young Billy Parker, 12 years old, small for his age, with wide, haunted eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a shock of unruly brown hair perpetually falling into them. He was an orphan, newly arrived in Stonebridge on the tail end of a wagon train that had lost both his parents to mountain fever during the arduous journey west. Left alone, with no kin, no prospects, he had drifted through the rough-and-tumble mining camp for a few days, sleeping in alleys, scrounging for scraps, his small valise containing his few meager possessions, a change of clothes, a worn wooden whistle his father had carved, and a tattered copy of Robinson Crusoe, his only companions. He was just another piece of human flotsam, easily overlooked, easily dismissed in a town preoccupied with the pursuit of gold and the daily struggle for survival. Billy, however, possessed a quiet resilience and a keen, observant eye, and he was drawn, inexplicably, to the rhythmic clang and fiery glow of Ben Cutler's smithy. He'd watch for hours from a safe distance, fascinated by the transformative power of the fire and the hammer, the way the burly blacksmith could take a rough piece of iron and shape it, bend it, imbue it with purpose and strength. There was a magic in it, a raw creation that captivated his young, lonely imagination. He saw not just the brute force, but the skill, the precision, the almost artistic eye Cutler brought to his work. One cold morning, driven by gnawing hunger and a desperate, childish hope, Billy gathered his courage and approached the smithy. Cutler was at the forge, his back to the street, wrestling a piece of glowing iron onto the anvil. The heat radiating from the forge was intense, even from the doorway. Mr. Cutler, sir?" Billy's voice was a thin quaver, almost lost in the roar of the bellows. Cutler didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him. He brought his hammer down with a resounding clang, sending sparks flying. Again, shaping the metal with powerful rhythmic blows. Billy tried again, louder this time. "Sir, could I maybe sweep up for you? Or fetch water? For just a bit of bread, maybe?" Cutler finally straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with a soot-stained forearm. He turned slowly, his gaze falling on the small, waif-like figure in the doorway, taking in the ragged clothes, the thin face, the hopeful, fearful eyes. His expression didn't soften. "Ain't got no use for strays," he grunted, his voice as rough as unfiled iron. "Got enough trouble keeping myself fed. Go on, boy, scat. Try the saloon kitchen. Maybe they got scraps." He turned back to his anvil, dismissing him. Billy's heart sank. Rejection. It was a familiar companion. He started to turn away, tears stinging his eyes when something unexpected happened. A length of hot iron, improperly secured on the anvil, skittered off under Cutler's next hammer blow, flying towards a pile of dry kindling stacked near the forge. Sparks ignited the kindling instantly. Flames leapt up, threatening to catch the wooden wall of the smithy. Cutler swore, dropping his hammer, reaching for a nearby water bucket. But Billy, reacting with a speed and instinct that surprised even himself, darted forward, grabbed a heavy piece of sackcloth lying nearby, and smothered the flames before they could spread, beating them out with quick, desperate slaps, ignoring the heat searing his hands. When the danger was past, Billy stood panting, his hands smarting, looking up at the blacksmith. Cutler stared at him, then at the smoldering kindling, then back at Billy. His expression was unreadable, but the initial dismissiveness was gone, replaced by a flicker of something else. Surprise? Grudging respect? He grunted again, a different kind of grunt this time. "Well now," Cutler said slowly, rubbing his soot-stained chin. Reckon you ain't entirely useless, boy." He looked at Billy's red, blistered hands. "Fetch that salve from the shelf yonder. Put some on those burns." He paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "And there's a half loaf of bread and some jerky in my saddlebags by the door. Help yourself, but don't get in my way, and don't expect no coddling." He turned back to his forge, but not before Billy caught a fleeting glimpse of something in his eyes, something that wasn't entirely hard, something that might, just might, have been a grudging acceptance. And so began Billy Parker's unlikely apprenticeship, or perhaps more accurately, his tolerated presence, in Ben Cutler's smithy. It wasn't a kind arrangement, not at first. Cutler remained gruff, demanding, quick to criticize, slow to praise. Billy swept the floors, carried water, pumped the heavy bellows until his arms ached, sorted scrap iron, ran errands. In return, he got a place to sleep on a pile of sacks in a corner of the smithy, and a share of Cutler's simple, often meager meals. It was a hard life, filled with smoke, sweat, and the constant clang of the hammer. But for Billy, it was a refuge. It was a purpose. And it was a chance to watch, to learn, to absorb the ancient fiery magic of the blacksmith's craft. He learned by observing Cutler's every move, the way he judged the heat of the iron by its color, the precise angle of his hammer blows, the subtle twist of his wrist that shaped the glowing metal. He learned the different tempers of steel, the secrets of quenching and annealing, the language of the fire and the anvil. Cutler rarely offered direct instruction, preferring to let Billy learn by watching, by trial and error. Mostly error, at first. But occasionally, if Billy showed a particular aptitude or asked an intelligent question, Cutler would grunt an explanation, offer a brusque tip, his gruffness masking a surprising patience for the boy's genuine curiosity. Billy, in turn, proved to be a surprisingly adept student. He was small, yes, but he was quick, his hands nimble, his eye keen. He had a natural feel for the metal, an intuitive understanding of how it would behave under the hammer. He started with simple tasks, straightening bent nails, shaping rough hooks. Then, under Cutler's watchful, critical eye, he progressed to more complex work, forging hinges, repairing tools, even attempting small decorative pieces from scraps of iron in his rare moments of free time. He discovered a joy in the creation, in the transformation of raw material into something useful, something strong, something even beautiful. The fire of the forge seemed to burn away some of the cold loneliness in his orphaned heart, replacing it with a new, consuming passion. Cutler, though he rarely admitted it, began to rely on the boy. Billy's quickness saved him time. His sharp eyes often spotted flaws Cutler might have missed. His quiet, unobtrusive presence slowly filled some of the vast emptiness in the solitary blacksmith's life, an emptiness Cutler himself hadn't fully acknowledged until the boy arrived. He still growled at Billy, still criticized his mistakes, but there was a subtle shift in his tone, a lessening of the harshness, an occasional, almost imperceptible nod of approval that meant more to Billy than any spoken praise. The town of Stonebridge, however, was less accepting of this unconventional arrangement. Whispers followed Billy whenever he went to the mercantile for supplies or to the creek for water. Cutler's boy. That orphan brat he took in. Working him like a slave, likely. What's an old hermit like Cutler want with a boy anyway? The town matriarchs, led by the formidable Mrs. Higgins, wife of the mayor and self-appointed guardian of Stonebridge's precarious morality, viewed the situation with open disapproval. It wasn't proper, they declared. A boy Billy's age should be in school, though Stonebridge's part-time, often drunk schoolmaster was hardly an inspiring alternative, or placed with a decent Christian family, though none had stepped forward to offer Billy a home when he'd first arrived, orphaned and destitute. They saw Cutler as a rough, ungodly man, his smithy a place of soot and fire, no fit environment for a young boy. The pressure mounted. Mrs. Higgins and her coterie made pointed visits to the smithy, ostensibly to have tools repaired, but really to scrutinize Billy, to offer Cutler unsolicited advice on the boy's upbringing, to hint darkly about reporting the situation to the distant territorial authorities. Cutler met their intrusions with stony silence or brusque dismissals, which only fueled their disapproval. He wasn't a man to be swayed by gossip or societal pressure. Billy was useful. He was learning. And perhaps, though Cutler would never admit it, the boy's presence had become necessary, a quiet counterpoint to the clang of his hammer, a flicker of young life in his solitary firelit world. But Stonebridge was a mining town, and mining towns attracted more than just hopeful prospectors and stern matriarchs. They attracted predators. A new element had recently arrived in Stonebridge, a man named Silas Thorne. Again that name, a recurring echo of ambition and ruthlessness, though perhaps each thorn a distinct shadow. This Thorne was not a cattle baron or a patent medicine fraud, but a different kind of vulture, a land speculator, a purveyor of false claims, a man who preyed on the hopes and desperation of miners. He arrived with a smooth tongue, a pocketful of dubious maps, and a couple of hard-eyed enforcers who looked like they knew their way around the dark side of the law. Thorne began buying up claims, often from miners who had hit a patch of bad luck or were deep in debt, paying pennies on the dollar, then reselling them at inflated prices to naive newcomers, or simply holding on to them, waiting for their value to increase. He was also rumored to be involved in more nefarious activities, salting worthless claims, strong-arming legitimate owners, perhaps even orchestrating accidents that conveniently freed up desirable properties. He cast a long, cold shadow over Stonebridge, his greed a palpable threat to the town's fragile stability. And Silas Thorne, it turned out, had his eye on Ben Cutler's smithy, not for the smithy itself, but for the land it sat on. Cutler's property, at the edge of town, bordered a small, seemingly insignificant creek. But Thorne, with his access to geological surveys, likely acquired through bribery or deceit, knew something the others didn't. That creek bed, further upstream, held traces of a rich gold deposit. If he could acquire Cutler's land, he could control access to the creek, divert its flow if necessary, and quietly exploit the upstream claim he was secretly trying to secure. The old blacksmith and his orphan apprentice were quite simply in his way. Thorne began his campaign subtly, as was his wont. He sent one of his men to Cutler, offering a generous price for the smithy and the land. Cutler, who had no intention of selling the place he'd built with his own hands, the only home he'd known for years, dismissed the offer curtly. Thorne's offers became more insistent, then turned into veiled threats. "A man your age, Cutler," Thorne had said during one encounter, his voice silkily menacing, "should be thinking about retirement. This town, it's getting rougher. Accidents happen. Fires start easily in a smithy, all that coal and hot iron." Cutler, unintimidated, had simply stared Thorne down, his silence more eloquent than any threat. But he knew Thorne wasn't a man to be easily dissuaded. The pressure would escalate. The conflict brewing wasn't just about land. It was about the soul of Stonebridge, about whether it would remain a town of honest miners and hard-working craftsmen, or succumb to the predatory greed of men like Thorn. And Ben Cutler, the solitary blacksmith, and young Billy Parker, the orphan boy with a nascent talent for the forge, found themselves, unexpectedly, standing directly in the path of the storm. The fire in Cutler's forge was about to be tested by a different, colder kind of flame. The shadow of Silas Thorne's ambition fell heavily over Stonebridge, and particularly over Ben Cutler's smithy. Thorne, accustomed to getting what he wanted through a combination of charm, bribery, and, when necessary, brutal intimidation, did not take Cutler's refusal to sell lightly. He saw the old blacksmith not as a respected craftsman, but as an obstacle, a stubborn old fool clinging to a piece of land Thorne coveted for reasons far more significant than a simple smithy. The rumored gold upstream was the real prize, and Cutler's property, with its creek access, was the key to unlocking it. Thorne's tactics escalated from veiled threats to more direct harassment. His men, led by a particularly vicious enforcer named Jedediah "Jed" Stone, a name that echoes with both solitary strength and, in this incarnation, brutal thuggery, for names, like reputations, can be twisted and reused by fate, began to make Cutler's life difficult. They would loiter outside the smithy, making loud, disparaging remarks about Cutler's age, his skill, his orphan charity case. They would accidentally damage tools or wagon wheels, then bring them to Cutler for repair, complaining loudly about the quality of his work and refusing to pay full price. They spread rumors through the town that Cutler was losing his touch, that his eyesight was failing, that he was no longer capable of handling the demanding work of a frontier blacksmith. The townsfolk, already influenced by Mrs. Higgins's campaign against Cutler's guardianship of Billy, and increasingly intimidated by Thorne's growing power and his gang of roughs, began to shy away from the smithy. Business dwindled. Miners who had once relied on Cutler for sharpening their drills and picks now took their work to a newer, less skilled blacksmith Thorne had conveniently encouraged to set up shop at the other end of town. The rhythmic clang of Cutler's hammer, once a constant, reassuring heartbeat in Stonebridge, grew less frequent, sometimes falling silent for days at a time. Ben Cutler bore the pressure with stoic grimness. He said little, his face growing harder, his eyes colder. He continued his work, what little there was, with meticulous care, refusing to be intimidated. But Billy saw the toll it was taking. He saw the new lines of worry etched around Cutler's mouth, the weariness in his slumped shoulders at the end of a long, often fruitless day. He saw the frustration in Cutler's eyes when a customer, clearly coerced, made a flimsy excuse to take their business elsewhere. And Billy, in his own quiet way, felt a surge of helpless anger, a fierce loyalty to the gruff old man who had, however reluctantly, given him shelter, purpose, and a craft to learn. Billy himself became a target. Thorne's men, particularly Jed Stone, seemed to take a cruel pleasure in tormenting the boy. They'd trip him when he carried water, knock over piles of scrap iron he'd carefully sorted, call him names: Cutler's little shadow, smithy rat, orphan trash. Billy endured it silently, his small face pale but set, his eyes burning with a suppressed fury he dared not show. He knew Cutler was watching, knew any open defiance from him might bring even greater retribution down on the old blacksmith. So he swallowed the insults, cleaned up the messes, and retreated further into the smoky sanctuary of the forge, finding solace in the heat, the work, the feel of the hammer in his increasingly calloused hands. His talent for the craft continued to blossom, an unexpected flower in the harsh soil of their embattled lives. Under Cutler's increasingly less gruff tutelage, for the shared adversity was slowly, almost imperceptibly forging a bond between them, Billy's skills grew rapidly. He learned to work the bellows with a strength that belied his small frame, to judge the heat of the metal with uncanny accuracy, to wield the lighter hammers with a precision and rhythm that surprised even Cutler. He developed an intuitive feel for the iron, an ability to coax it into shapes that were not just functional, but possessed a simple, rugged beauty. He started forging small items on his own intricate hooks, decorative hinges, even a surprisingly delicate little iron rose he shyly presented to Sarah Carter, the kind wife of Stonebridge's ineffectual sheriff, a woman who had shown him occasional kindness. Again, that name Carter, a thread of decency woven through these disparate tales. Sarah had been touched by the gift, praising his skill, offering him a rare smile of genuine encouragement. Cutler watched the boy's progress with a mixture of pride he rarely showed and a growing unease. Billy's talent was undeniable. He had the gift, the fire in his belly that separated a true smith from a mere metal banger. But this was a dangerous time, a dangerous place, to nurture such a talent. Thorn's shadow loomed large, and Cutler knew, with a grim certainty, that Thorn wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. The smithy, the land, the creek access, they were all just pieces in Thorn's larger game. The crisis came to a head one bitter autumn afternoon. Cutler had received a rare, substantial order to shoe a string of pack mules for a group of prospectors heading into the high country before the winter snows closed the passes. It was a vital job, the pay much needed. He and Billy worked tirelessly for 2 days, the forge roaring, the hammer ringing, the smithy filled with the satisfying rhythm of honest labor. They finished the job just as dusk was settling, the last mule shod, the prospectors pleased, the payment, a small pouch of gold dust, safely tucked away. Cutler, weary but with a rare sense of satisfaction, sent Billy to the mercantile for some much-needed supplies: flour, coffee, bacon. As Billy hurried down the darkening street, his small figure dwarfed by the looming false fronts of the buildings, Jed Stone and 2 of his cronies stepped out of the shadows of an alleyway, blocking his path. "Well, well, if it ain't Cutler's little hammer boy," Stone sneered, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey. "Looky here, boys. Got himself some spendin' money, has he?" He made a grab for the small pouch of coins Cutler had given Billy for the supplies. Billy, though terrified, clutched the pouch tightly, trying to dodge past. "Leave me be, Mr. Stone. It ain't mine." Stone laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He backhanded Billy hard across the face, sending the boy sprawling into the dusty street, the coins scattering. "Now it ain't, runt," Stone growled, as he and his men began scooping up the coins. Just then, Ben Cutler, having grown uneasy when Billy didn't return promptly, had stepped out of the smithy to look for him. He saw the scene from the end of the street, his boy on the ground, Stone and his men looming over him, pocketing the money. A cold, terrible rage, a rage Cutler hadn't felt in years, surged through him. He didn't shout, didn't hesitate. He moved with the surprising speed and lethal purpose of a man pushed too far. He reached the group just as Stone was aiming a kick at the still-dazed Billy. Cutler's calloused fist, hard as forged iron, connected with Stone's jaw, sending the bigger man staggering back, blood spurting from his split lip. Stone's 2 cronies, startled, turned to face this unexpected fury. Cutler didn't give them a chance. He moved between them, a whirlwind of righteous anger, his fists like hammers, striking with a precision and power that belied his age. One man went down with a groan, clutching his ribs. The other, seeing the murderous light in Cutler's eyes, turned and fled. Stone, recovering, his face contorted with rage, pulled a knife from his boot. "You'll pay for that, old man," he snarled, lunging at Cutler. Cutler sidestepped the clumsy attack, grabbed Stone's knife wrist, and with a powerful twist, disarmed him, the knife clattering onto the boardwalk. He then slammed Stone hard against the wall of the mercantile, his forearm pressed against the bully's throat, his face inches from Stone's. "You touch that boy again," Cutler growled, his voice low and deadly, his blue eyes blazing with a cold fire Billy had never seen before. "You even look at him wrong, and I'll heat up my forge and use you to temper the steel. Understand?" Stone, choking, terrified by the old man's sudden savage transformation, could only nod frantically, his eyes wide with fear. Cutler held him there for a long moment, letting the threat sink in, then shoved him away contemptuously. Stone stumbled, then scrambled to his feet and fled down the street, disappearing into the darkness, leaving behind only the scattered coins and the stunned silence of the few onlookers who had witnessed the brief, brutal confrontation. Cutler turned to Billy, who was slowly picking himself up, his face bruised, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear, shock, and dawning awe. The blacksmith's rage seemed to dissipate as quickly as it had flared, replaced by a rough concern. "You all right, boy?" he asked, his voice gruff but lacking its usual harshness. He helped Billy gather the scattered coins. Didn't get much, did they? He looked at Billy's bruised cheek. Come on, let's get back to the smithy. Got some salve for that. As they walked back through the darkened streets, a new unspoken understanding passed between them. Ben Cutler wasn't just a gruff old blacksmith anymore. He was a protector, a man who would fight for what was his, for who was his. And Billy Parker wasn't just an orphan apprentice. He was Cutler's boy. In that moment of shared danger, of unexpected, fierce loyalty, the walls between them had crumbled, replaced by a bond forged not in fire and steel, but in something far stronger, far more enduring. But they both knew this was not the end. It was merely a skirmish. Silas Thorne would not take this defiance lightly. The real battle for Cutler's smithy, for their future, was yet to come. The confrontation with Jed Stone and his men was a turning point, but not in the way Silas Thorne might have hoped. Instead of intimidating Cutler and Billy, it solidified their bond and hardened their resolve. It also, surprisingly, began to shift the sentiment in Stonebridge, just slightly. Witnesses to Cutler's fierce defense of the boy and his utter routing of Stone's gang spread the story. Some who had previously scorned Cutler as a reclusive old miser or pitied Billy as an exploited orphan now saw them differently, as a man of unexpected strength and principle, and a boy who inspired fierce loyalty. Mrs. Higgins and her gossiping friends still clucked their disapproval, but their voices were a little less confident, their audience a little less receptive. Sarah Carter, the sheriff's wife, openly praised Cutler's actions, and even Sheriff Carter himself, a man usually inclined to avoid confrontation, offered Cutler a grudging nod of respect. Silas Thorne, however, was enraged. His enforcer, Jed Stone, had been humiliated, his authority challenged, his plans for Cutler's land momentarily thwarted. He knew he couldn't let it stand. He couldn't afford to look weak. He summoned Stone, who was nursing a swollen jaw and a battered ego. You let an old man and a half-starved whelp get the better of you? Thorne sneered, his voice dangerously soft. Stone flinched. I pay you to deliver results, Stone, not excuses. Cutler is becoming a nuisance, a symbol of defiance. That cannot be tolerated. Thorne paced his small, overly furnished office above the new saloon he now controlled. He won't sell. He won't be intimidated. So we escalate. We make his life untenable. We make Stonebridge itself unwelcome to him. And if that doesn't work... Thorne paused, a cold smile touching his lips. Accidents happen, Stone. Fires, as I mentioned. Or perhaps the boy. A tragic mishap at the forge. Cutler might lose his will to fight if he lost his little shadow. The implication was chillingly clear. Thorne's new campaign of harassment was more insidious, more calculated. He didn't send his men to directly confront Cutler again, not immediately. Instead, he began to squeeze him economically, socially. He leaned on the mercantile owner, Mr. Henderson, a familiar name for a man of commerce, it seems, to restrict Cutler's credit, to misplace his orders for coal and iron. He pressured the livery stable owner to refuse to board horses for customers wanting work done at Cutler's smithy. He spread fresh rumors that Cutler's work was shoddy, that he overcharged, that he was a dangerous recluse who consorted with undesirables. A vague reference to Billy, perhaps, or to Cutler's own solitary nature. The pressure worked. Cutler's already dwindling business dried up almost completely. Days would pass with the forge cold, the anvil silent. The small pouch of gold dust from the prospector's mule-shoeing job was their only reserve, and it wouldn't last long. Hunger, a specter they had kept at bay through hard work, began to loom again. Billy watched, his heart heavy, as Cutler grew more withdrawn, his silence heavier, his shoulders more stooped. The old blacksmith still worked when he could, meticulously repairing his own tools, forging small items from scrap metal, perhaps just to keep his hands busy, to fight off the encroaching despair. He shared what little food they had with Billy without complaint, but the boy saw the worry in his eyes, the deep weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was Billy who, in his quiet, observant way, found a small avenue of resistance. He had a natural talent not just for shaping iron, but for drawing. In his few spare moments, using charcoal sticks on scraps of wood or flattened pieces of tin, he would sketch the flames in the forge, The powerful lines of Cutler's arm as he swung the hammer, the patient stance of a horse waiting to be shod, even the harsh, beautiful lines of the surrounding mountains. His sketches were crude, untutored, but they possessed a surprising vitality, a keen eye for detail, a spark of genuine artistry. One day, Sarah Carter, visiting the smithy on the pretext of needing a small garden hoe repaired, a task she knew the new blacksmith Thorne favored would bungle, saw some of Billy's sketches tacked to the rough wall of the smithy. She was astonished. "Billy," she exclaimed, "did you draw these? They're wonderful." Billy flushed, embarrassed by the unexpected praise. Cutler, who had largely ignored the boy's doodlings, grunted from the forge, but there was a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. Sarah had an idea. "You know, Billy," she said thoughtfully, "the circuit preacher, Reverend Allen, he often talks about needing illustrations for his sermons, simple pictures to help folks understand the parables. And there are newcomers arriving in Stonebridge all the time. Prospectors, families, who need to know where to find honest services. Perhaps your drawings could be useful." It was a small opening, but it gave Billy a purpose beyond the failing smithy. He began drawing with renewed fervor. He sketched simple maps of the town for newcomers, highlighting honest businesses and subtly omitting those known to be thorns. He drew illustrations for Reverend Allen's sermons, a lost sheep, a mustard seed, a sower in the field, images that, despite their crudeness, possessed a heartfelt sincerity that touched the small congregation. He even did a few portraits, quick charcoal sketches of miners or their children, for which they sometimes paid him a few pennies or a share of their meager rations. It wasn't much, but it brought in a trickle of food, a sense of contribution, and perhaps more importantly, a small measure of respect from some of the townsfolk who began to see him not just as Cutler's orphan, but as Billy, the boy who draws. His greatest talent, however, remained with the forge. One afternoon, while Cutler was away attempting to negotiate for a small load of coal from a reluctant supplier miles out of town, Billy, restless and needing to work, decided to try something ambitious. He had been studying the way Cutler forged horseshoes, the precise balance of heat and hammer, the careful shaping to fit each individual hoof. He took a piece of scrap iron, fired up the forge himself, a task Cutler usually reserved for his own powerful arms on the bellows, and began to work. The iron was stubborn, the hammer heavy for his small frame. He made mistakes, burned his fingers, ruined several pieces. But he persisted, driven by a fierce determination, a love for the craft that transcended the difficulty. Finally, after hours of sweat and frustration, he produced a single, perfectly shaped, perfectly balanced horseshoe. It wasn't as polished as Cutler's work, but the form, the integrity, was there. He held it up, his heart swelling with a fierce, quiet pride. When Cutler returned late that evening, weary and unsuccessful in his quest for coal, he found Billy asleep on his pile of sacks, the small, perfect horseshoe lying on the anvil beside him. Cutler picked it up, examined it closely in the dying firelight, turning it over and over in his calloused hands. He ran his thumb over its smooth curves, noted the precise nail holes, the evenness of the weight. A strange expression crossed his face, a mixture of astonishment, disbelief, and a profound, unexpected surge of something akin to joy. He looked at the sleeping boy, at the small, determined set of his soot-smudged face. He didn't wake him. He simply placed the horseshoe carefully back on the anvil, then gently covered Billy with his own worn blanket. He sat by the dying fire for a long time that night, the silence of the smithy filled not with despair, but with a new, dawning thought. Maybe there was a future here after all. Not just for him, but for the boy with the fire in his hands. The discovery of Billy's horseshoe and the quiet burgeoning of his artistic talent seemed to breathe new life into Ben Cutler. The old blacksmith, who had been slowly succumbing to the weight of Thorne's pressure and the encroaching despair, found a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to fight back beyond just stubborn pride. He wasn't just defending his smithy anymore. He was defending Billy's future, nurturing a talent that felt precious, almost sacred, in the harsh, utilitarian world of Stonebridge. He began to teach Billy in earnest, sharing the secrets of the craft he had hoarded for so long. He showed him the subtle nuances of heating different types of iron, the precise hammer techniques for drawing out, upsetting, welding. He taught him how to read the language of the fire, the whispers of the steel. He pushed Billy hard, demanding perfection, but his criticism was now laced with a gruff encouragement, his rare nods of approval becoming more frequent. Billy, in turn, blossomed under the focused tutelage, his natural talent taking flight, his small hands developing an uncanny strength and dexterity. He started taking on more of the smithy work, his skill surprising even himself. He could shoe a horse with a sureness that belied his age, repair a broken wagon wheel with an expert's eye, forge tools that were both strong and elegantly shaped. The rhythmic clang of the hammer in the smithy grew more constant again, often a duet now. The deeper ring of Cutler's heavy sledge answered by the lighter, quicker rhythm of Billy's smaller hammer. Their renewed activity, however, did not go unnoticed by Silas Thorne. He saw the smoke rising more consistently from Cutler's chimney, heard the hammers ringing with a new vigor. He saw Billy, no longer just a scrawny apprentice, but a young craftsman developing a reputation of his own, his small drawings and carvings finding favor with some of the townsfolk, even earning a few precious coins that helped keep starvation at bay. Thorne realized his campaign of economic strangulation wasn't working as quickly as he'd hoped. Cutler and the boy were proving more resilient, more resourceful than he had anticipated. He needed to escalate things further, to deliver a blow that would break them completely. His opportunity came with the arrival of the new stamping mill. Stonebridge's gold was mostly hard rock ore, requiring heavy machinery to crush it and extract the precious metal. A group of Eastern investors, lured by Thorne's inflated promises of the region's richness, had financed the construction of a large, steam-powered stamping mill just outside town, a noisy, smoke-belching behemoth that promised to revolutionize mining in the district. Thorne, through his usual machinations, had managed to secure a controlling interest in the mill, giving him even greater power over the local economy. Every miner would now depend on his mill to process their ore, and Thorne could dictate the terms, the fees, the assays. The stamping mill, however, required constant maintenance, its heavy iron machinery subject to brutal wear and tear. It needed a skilled blacksmith, not just for routine repairs, but for forging specialized replacement parts, for custom work that the distant foundries back east couldn't provide quickly or cheaply. Thorne initially offered the lucrative mill contract to the newer, less skilled blacksmith he favored, a man named Henderson, again, a name common to commerce, though this Henderson was more pliable than some we've met. But Henderson quickly proved unequal to the task, his work shoddy, his knowledge insufficient for the complex demands of the heavy machinery. The mill suffered breakdowns, delays, costing Thorne money and damaging his reputation with the Eastern investors. Thorne, furious, was forced to reconsider. There was only one blacksmith in Stonebridge with the skill, the experience, the artistry to handle the demanding work of the stamping mill, Ben Cutler. But Cutler had defied him, resisted him. To offer him the contract now would be a public admission of Thorne's own misjudgment, a concession of defeat. Yet the mill needed Cutler's expertise. Thorne, ever the manipulator, devised a new strategy. He couldn't break Cutler through direct intimidation or economic pressure, so he would try to co-opt him, to bind him through a false offer of partnership, then slowly, subtly, undermine him, steal his knowledge, perhaps even his apprentice, and ultimately secure the smithy land he still coveted. He approached Cutler one morning, not with threats, but with an air of magnanimous reconciliation. "Cutler," Thorne began, his voice smooth, almost conciliatory, "I've been impressed by your resilience, by the boy's developing skill." He gestured towards the distant, smoke-belching stamping mill. "That mill, it's the future of Stonebridge. It needs a master smith. Henderson ain't up to the task. I was wrong about him." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm prepared to offer you the exclusive contract for all the mill's blacksmithing work. It's a big job. More than one man, even one as skilled as you, can handle. But with the boy, your apprentice, Perhaps together you could manage it. The pay would be substantial, more than you've seen in years. It would mean prosperity, security, for both of you." He smiled, a wolfish, insincere smile. "What do you say, Cutler? Let bygones be bygones, for the good of Stonebridge, for the future of your boy here?" The offer was a poisoned apple, gleaming, tempting, but rotten to the core. Cutler knew it. He saw the calculation in Thorne's eyes, the hidden agenda beneath the smooth words. Thorne didn't care about Stonebridge or Billy's future. He wanted Cutler's skill, needed it for his mill, and he still wanted Cutler's land. This contract was a Trojan horse, a way to get inside Cutler's defenses, to control him, perhaps to eventually ruin him when he was no longer needed. Cutler looked at Billy, who stood listening, his young face alight with a mixture of excitement at the prospect of such challenging work and a dawning, wary understanding of Thorne's duplicity, an understanding learned through hard experience. Billy met Cutler's gaze, his eyes conveying a silent trust, a willingness to follow the old blacksmith's lead, whatever his decision. Cutler turned back to Thorne. He was old, yes, and tired of fighting. The offer of steady work, of security for Billy, was undeniably tempting. But he was not a fool, and he was not a man to sell his soul or his craft to the likes of Silas Thorne. "Thorne," Cutler said, his voice quiet but firm, "I appreciate the offer. And you're right. The mill needs good work. Billy here, he's got the gift. He could handle much of it under my guidance." He paused, then added, his eyes as hard as tempered steel, "But I work for myself, on my terms, in my own smithy. If you want my skill or his, you'll pay a fair price for honest work, same as any other customer. No contracts that bind me to you, no partnerships that put a noose around my neck. And," he added, his gaze unwavering, "you and your men will leave us be. No more harassment, no more threats. You want our work. You treat us with respect, as craftsmen, not as hired hands to be bullied or cheated." Thorne's smile vanished, his eyes narrowed with fury at Cutler's unexpected defiance, his refusal to be bought or controlled. He had underestimated the old blacksmith again. He had expected gratitude, subservience. He got conditions, demands. "You're a fool, Cutler," Thorne snarled. "An arrogant old fool. You think you can dictate terms to me? I can ruin you. I can—" "You've tried, Thorne," Cutler interrupted, his voice still quiet, but carrying an unshakable authority. "And you failed. Now you need me. Or rather, you need the skill that resides in this smithy." He gestured towards Billy. "And it ain't just mine anymore. It's his too. And it ain't for sale. Not cheap anyway." He looked Thorne squarely in the eye. "So, what'll it be, Thorne? Honest work? Fair pay? Or do you want your precious mill to keep breaking down, your investors to keep asking awkward questions?" Thorne stared at Cutler, his face a mask of frustrated rage. He was caught. He needed Cutler's skill. He couldn't afford for the mill to fail. But to accede to Cutler's terms, to treat him as an equal, was galling to his pride, a public admission of his dependence on the very man he had tried to destroy. The emotional twist was profound. The power dynamic had shifted, unexpectedly, dramatically. Ben Cutler, the aging, isolated blacksmith, seemingly on the brink of ruin, had, through a combination of his own unwavering integrity, Billy's burgeoning talent, and Thorne's own miscalculations, found himself in a position of surprising strength. He had refused to be broken, refused to be bought. He had stood his ground, defended his craft, his apprentice, his dignity, and in doing so, he had forced Silas Thorne, the town's powerful puppet master, into an unwelcome corner. The future of Stonebridge's stamping mill, and perhaps Thorne's entire enterprise, now depended not on Thorne's dictates, but on the terms set by the gruff old blacksmith and his surprisingly capable young apprentice. The fire in Cutler's forge burned brighter than ever, fueled by more than just coal and bellows. It burned with the defiant flame of skill, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a master and his unlikely protege. Silas Thorne, a man unaccustomed to being defied, especially by someone he considered his inferior, was momentarily speechless. He glared at Cutler, then at Billy, his mind clearly racing, weighing his options. To publicly back down, to accept Cutler's terms, would be a humiliation. But the stamping mill was bleeding money with every breakdown, every delay. His Eastern investors were growing impatient, their letters increasingly demanding. He needed the mill operational, profitable, and for that, he needed a master smith. Henderson, his hand-picked lackey, was worse than useless. Cutler, damn him, was the only one in the territory capable of the intricate, demanding work. Finally, Thorne seemed to make a decision, his face still tight with suppressed fury, but his voice regaining its smooth, calculating tone. "All right, Cutler," he said, forcing a magnanimous air. "All right. Perhaps I was hasty. You're a skilled man. The boy shows promise. Stonebridge needs your talents. Your terms. They are acceptable. For now." The unspoken threat hung in the air. "You will have the mill work. You will be paid fairly. And," he added, his eyes glinting, "my men will trouble you no further. As long as you deliver. As long as the mill runs smoothly." He turned on his heel and strode out of the smithy, his enforcers trailing silently behind him, leaving behind a charged silence and the faint, lingering scent of brimstone. Cutler and Billy watched him go, neither speaking for a long moment. Then Cutler let out a slow breath, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. He looked at Billy, a rare, almost shy smile touching his lips. "Well, boy," he said gruffly, "reckon we got ourselves a dragon by the tail." "We do, Mr. Cutler," Billy replied, his own heart still pounding, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through him. "But we got him. And so began a new, uneasy chapter in the life of Stonebridge, and in the relationship between Ben Cutler and Billy Parker. The work from the stamping mill poured in, demanding, complex, pushing their skills to the limit. They forged massive drive shafts, repaired broken gears, tempered specialized cutting tools, their days filled with the roar of the forge, the clang of hammers, the smell of hot metal and sweat. They worked side by side, master and apprentice, their earlier roles blurring as Billy's strength and skill grew, his contributions becoming indispensable. Cutler, though still the master, found himself increasingly relying on Billy's keen eye, his nimble hands, his intuitive understanding of the metal. They became a true partnership, their unspoken communication flowing as smoothly as molten iron. The town watched, fascinated, as the old smithy, once nearly silent, now pulsed with relentless activity, its fires burning late into the night. Cutler and Billy, once scorned and isolated, were now vital to the town's prosperity, for the stamping mill was the heart of Stonebridge's economy. The respect they earned was tangible, no longer grudging but genuine. Even Mrs. Higgins offered a stiff nod of approval when she passed, though she still muttered about the impropriety of a boy working such long, hard hours. Silas Thorne kept his word, outwardly at least. His men left Cutler and Billy alone. The payments for their work arrived promptly. The mill, under their skilled attention, began to run more smoothly, its breakdowns less frequent. Thorne himself maintained a cool, distant civility, occasionally visiting the smithy to inspect their progress, his eyes always watchful, calculating, his true intentions hidden beneath a veneer of professional courtesy. Cutler and Billy remained wary, knowing Thorne was a snake, capable of striking when least expected. They worked hard, saved their earnings, but kept their guard up. During this period, Billy's other talent, his drawing, also continued to develop, though he had less time for it now. He still sketched in the evenings, by the dying light of the forge or the flickering flame of a single candle, capturing the raw power of the stamping mill's machinery, the weary faces of the miners, the stark beauty of the surrounding mountains. His drawings became more confident, more detailed, his lines surer. Sarah Carter, the sheriff's wife, remained his staunchest supporter, occasionally bringing him proper paper and charcoal sticks, encouraging him to continue. She even arranged for a traveling photographer, passing through Stonebridge, to see some of Billy's work. The photographer, a sophisticated man from back east, was astonished by the boy's raw, untutored talent. "This boy, he has the eye, madam," the photographer told Sarah. "The eye of an artist. He sees the truth of things. He offered to take some of Billy's sketches back east, to show them to publishers of illustrated journals, perhaps even to art schools. It was a dazzling, almost unimaginable prospect for a boy who had, not so long ago, been a homeless orphan. Billy, torn between his loyalty to Cutler and the Forge, and the exciting, frightening pull of this new possibility, didn't know what to think. Cutler, when Sarah Carter hesitantly shared the photographer's offer, listened silently, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Billy feared the old blacksmith would be angry, would see it as a betrayal of the craft he had taught him. But Cutler surprised him. "Well, boy," Cutler said gruffly after a long pause, not looking at Billy. Reckon a man's got to follow his own fire, be it in a forge or on a piece of paper." He cleared his throat. "This here smithy, it ain't much of a future for a lad with your talents. Stonebridge, it's a hard town. No place for artists." He finally looked at Billy, his blue eyes holding a mixture of pride, sadness, and a profound, selfless generosity. "If you got a chance to make something more of yourself, something beyond shoeing horses and fixing machines, then you best take it. Don't let no one, not even an old fool like me, hold you back." The offer, the sacrifice inherent in Cutler's words, touched Billy to the core. He realized then the true depth of the old blacksmith's affection for him, an affection rarely spoken, but demonstrated in countless ways, in shared labor, in patient teaching, in fierce protection, and now, in this selfless encouragement to pursue a different dream, even if it meant leaving the forge, leaving Cutler himself. But Billy's choice was interrupted by a new, more immediate crisis, one that threatened to destroy not just their fragile prosperity, but Stonebridge itself. A problem with the stamping mill, far more serious than routine breakdowns, began to emerge. The massive timbers supporting the heaviest machinery, timbers that were supposed to have been seasoned hardwood, started to show signs of stress, of cracking, of imminent failure. If they gave way, the entire mill could collapse, taking with it not just Thorne's investment, but the livelihoods of every miner in Stonebridge. Thorne, frantic, summoned Cutler and Billy. He had already brought in engineers from back east, but they were baffled, or perhaps unwilling to pinpoint the cause, fearing Thorne's wrath. Cutler and Billy examined the failing timbers, their experienced eyes immediately seeing the problem. The wood wasn't seasoned hardwood, as specified in the original plans Thorne had so proudly displayed. It was green pine, hastily cut, improperly cured, completely inadequate for the immense stresses of the stamping machinery. Someone had cut corners, dangerously, fatally. Someone had supplied inferior materials, pocketing the difference. Cutler looked directly at Thorne, his eyes like chips of ice. "This ain't wear and tear, Thorne," he stated flatly. "This is fraud. Someone sold you green pine instead of oak, and you, or your engineers, were either too blind to see it or too greedy to care." Thorne's face flushed, then paled. He knew. He must have known, or at least suspected. Perhaps he himself had approved the cheaper timber, hoping to cut costs, gambling that it would hold long enough. Now, his gamble was about to bring disaster. "Can it be fixed?" Thorne demanded, his voice tight with desperation. "Can you shore it up? Replace the timbers?" Cutler shook his head slowly. "Too late for shoring up. Those main supports are ready to go. Whole thing could come down any day. Only way is to shut it down completely, dismantle the machinery, rebuild the foundations with proper timber. Take months. Cost a fortune." Thorne stared at him aghast. Shut down the mill for months? It would ruin him, ruin the town. "There has to be another way," he insisted. "Some temporary fix, something to keep it running just for a little longer." Cutler and Billy exchanged a look. They both knew the risks. A temporary fix on such massive, unstable machinery was incredibly dangerous, almost certainly doomed to fail, potentially catastrophically. But if the mill collapsed, the thought was unthinkable. It was Billy who spoke, his voice quiet but surprisingly firm. "Mr. Cutler, remember those iron support braces we forged for the old mine shaft up on Widow's Peak? The ones that had to take the weight of the whole mountain?" Cutler nodded slowly. Maybe something like that? Forged iron trusses? Custom fit to take the strain off the main timbers? Buy some time? It'd be a hell of a job. Dangerous. But maybe possible. Cutler looked at the boy, at the daring, ingenious idea sparking in his young eyes. It was a long shot, a blacksmith's solution to an engineer's nightmare. Forging iron trusses massive enough, strong enough, to support the failing mill. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring all their skill, all their strength, all their courage, and it would mean working directly under the shadow of the unstable machinery, risking their lives with every hammer blow, every heated rivet. Thorne seized on the idea immediately, hope flaring in his desperate eyes. Yes, iron supports. Can you do it, Cutler? Can you save my mill? His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a pleading urgency. Cutler looked at Billy again, then at the groaning, cracking timbers of the stamping mill. He thought of Stonebridge, of the miners who depended on this mill, of the families who would be ruined if it failed. He thought of Billy's talent, his courage, his unwavering loyalty. He thought of the fire in his own forge, the fire in his own belly that refused to be extinguished. "Well, boy," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Reckon we ain't just blacksmiths anymore. Reckon we're about to become miracle workers, or die trying." The climax of their story was not a gunfight with outlaws, but a desperate, high-stakes battle against time, gravity, and greed, fought not with bullets, but with fire, steel, and the combined skill and courage of an old blacksmith and his young apprentice. The fate of Stonebridge and their own lives now rested on their ability to forge a solution, literally, from the heart of the fire, under the shadow of imminent disaster. The task before them was monumental, almost impossible. They had to design, forge, and install massive iron support trusses, custom-fitted to the unique stresses of the stamping mill's failing structure, all while the mill itself remained precariously operational, its tons of machinery vibrating, its rotten timbers groaning under the strain. A single miscalculation, a single flaw in their work, could bring the entire edifice crashing down, burying them and countless others. Silas Thorne, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate, almost fawning deference, gave Cutler and Billy carte blanche. He supplied them with all the iron and coal they needed, assigned a crew of his own terrified mill workers to assist with the heavy lifting and rigging, and hovered nervously in the background, his face pale with anxiety. The rest of Stonebridge watched, holding its collective breath. The rhythmic clang of hammers from Cutler's smithy, once a familiar background hum, now carried a new, urgent significance. It was the sound of their town's survival being forged, blow by painstaking blow. Cutler and Billy worked like men possessed. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of design, measurement, heating, hammering, shaping. They slept in brief, exhausted snatches on the floor of the smithy, rising before dawn, working late into the night, fueled by black coffee, grim determination, and the sheer adrenaline of the looming danger. The heat from the forge was infernal, the labor bone-jarring. Their muscles screamed, their hands were blistered and raw, their eyes burned from smoke and fatigue. But they pressed on. Cutler, despite his age, seemed to draw on some hidden reserve of strength, his movements precise, powerful, his knowledge of metalcraft almost intuitive. He directed the complex forging process, his voice gruff but clear, his eye missing no flaw, no imperfection. Billy, working beside him, matched him blow for blow, his youthful energy and innate talent proving indispensable. He learned faster than ever before, absorbing Cutler's lifetime of knowledge, his hands developing an almost magical ability to shape the glowing iron, to anticipate its stresses, to coax it into the exact forms required. They worked as a seamless team, a master and his prodigy, their hammers rising and falling in a desperate, defiant rhythm against the encroaching threat of disaster. The most dangerous part was the installation. Working high up on rickety scaffolding, directly beneath the groaning, unstable machinery, they had to maneuver the massive, newly forged iron trusses into place, bolting them to sounder sections of the mill's frame, transferring the immense stresses from the failing wooden supports to the new steel skeleton. The mill workers, terrified but inspired by Cutler's and Billy's fearless example, assisted with ropes and pulleys, their movements guided by Cutler's terse commands. Dust, soot, and the constant fear of collapse filled the air. Several times, timbers shifted alarmingly, sending showers of debris raining down, forcing them to scramble for safety. But they always returned, driven by the urgency of their task. During one particularly perilous phase, as they were trying to secure a key central truss, a main wooden support beam directly above them began to splinter, emitting a terrifying, cracking groan. The mill workers panicked, yelling, starting to flee. The entire section of the mill seemed poised to collapse. Silas Thorne, watching from a safe distance, turned even paler, looking ready to faint. In that moment of imminent disaster, it was Billy who acted. While Cutler instinctively tried to brace the failing beam with a heavy crowbar, knowing it was a futile gesture against such immense weight, Billy, with a speed and agility that belied his small frame, scrambled up the vibrating machinery like a squirrel. He reached a critical joint where several support struts converged, a point he had identified earlier as a potential weak link. Using a small, specialized wrench he had forged himself, he quickly tightened a series of loose bolts, then hammered in several iron wedges he had prepared, shoring up the joint, redirecting the stress, just as the splintering beam above them gave way with a sickening crack. The section of the mill shuddered violently, groaned, then, miraculously, held. The immediate collapse was averted, bought by Billy's quick thinking and courageous action. Cutler stared up at the boy, perched precariously on the machinery, his face smudged with grease and soot, but his eyes shining with a fierce, triumphant light. In that moment, Cutler saw not just an apprentice, but a true master smith in the making, a boy who possessed not only skill, but courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering determination. The work continued, day after grueling day, night after sleepless night. Slowly, painstakingly, the iron skeleton grew, reinforcing the failing mill, taking the strain, giving the rotten timbers a new lease on life. The rhythmic clang of their hammers became a beacon of hope for Stonebridge, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last truss was bolted into place. The last rivet hammered home. Cutler and Billy, covered in soot, sweat, and grime, their bodies aching with exhaustion, stood back and surveyed their work. The stamping mill, though still scarred and battered, now stood firm, supported by a network of gleaming, powerful iron braces, a testament to their skill, their courage, their unbreakable partnership. They had done it. They had saved the mill. They had saved Stonebridge. Silas Thorne, his relief palpable, his gratitude for once seemingly genuine, rushed forward, babbling thanks, promising bonuses, offering partnerships. Cutler cut him off with a weary wave of his hand. "Just pay us what you owe us for the iron and the labor, Thorne," he said, his voice hoarse. "And then, leave us be." He looked at Billy, a deep, quiet pride in his eyes. "The boy and I, we got other plans." The news of their heroic feat spread like wildfire. Ben Cutler and young Billy Parker were no longer just the town blacksmiths. They were legends, the saviors of Stonebridge. The town celebrated them, feted them, offered them anything they desired. But Cutler and Billy sought no rewards beyond fair payment and the quiet satisfaction of a monumental job well done. A few weeks later, after the mill was running smoothly again and their payment was secured, Ben Cutler did something that stunned Stonebridge. He sold his smithy not to Thorne, but to a younger, capable blacksmith from a neighboring town whom Cutler himself vetted and recommended. He then announced that he and Billy were leaving Stonebridge. "Where will you go, Mr. Cutler?" Sarah Carter asked, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness at their departure and admiration for their courage. Cutler looked at Billy, who stood beside him, no longer a waif-like orphan, but a strong, confident young man, his eyes holding a new maturity, a quiet self-assurance. "Reckon Billy here's got a fire in him that needs a different kind of forge," Cutler said, a rare, gentle smile touching his lips. "That photographer fella, he was right. The boy's got the eye of an artist. Time he went east, got himself some proper schooling, learned to shape something more than just iron." He paused, then added, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. And I reckon an old blacksmith might just enjoy seeing what wonders his apprentice can create, with charcoal and paper instead of a hammer and anvil. And so, Ben Cutler, the gruff solitary blacksmith, and Billy Parker, the orphan boy with the gift of fire in his hands and art in his soul, left Stonebridge. They didn't ride off into the sunset like gunslingers of legend. They boarded an eastbound stagecoach, then a train, heading towards a future neither of them could have imagined just a short time before. Cutler, using the money from the sale of his smithy and Thorne's reluctant but substantial payment for saving the mill, intended to see Billy enrolled in the best art school he could find back east, to give the boy the chance he himself had never had, the chance to forge a different kind of legacy. He would be Billy's guardian, his mentor, his quiet supporter, just as he had been in the smoky confines of the Stonebridge smithy. Their departure left a void in Stonebridge, but also a powerful legacy. The story of the old blacksmith and his orphan apprentice, of their courage, their skill, their unbreakable bond, became a cornerstone of the town's history, a tale told and retold, inspiring future generations. The stamping mill, supported by their iron trusses, continued to operate for many years, a constant, tangible reminder of their heroism. And perhaps, somewhere back east, in the hallowed halls of an art academy, or the bustling offices of an illustrated journal, a young man named Billy Parker, once a homeless orphan, now a promising artist, often paused in his work, his charcoal stick poised, and remembered the roar of the forge, the clang of the hammer, and the gruff, kind old man who had seen the fire within him and given him not just a craft, but a home, a future, and the courage to shape his own destiny. And so, the fires in Ben Cutler's smithy eventually cooled, but the true legacy he forged was not in iron and steel, but in the life of a young boy, and in the heart of a community that learned to look beyond the surface. This tale of Stonebridge, of an old blacksmith and his orphan apprentice, speaks to us across the years about the transformative power of mentorship, the unexpected blossoming of talent in the harshest of soils, and the quiet, enduring courage found in shared purpose and mutual respect. It reminds us, doesn't it, that a home isn't always built of logs and stone, but of trust, loyalty, and shared experience. Billy Parker, adrift and alone, found that home not in a charitable institution or a well-meaning family, but in the smoky, demanding world of Ben Cutler's forge. And Cutler, a man walled off by his own past sorrows and solitary habits, found in Billy not just an apprentice, but a son, a companion, a reason to reignite the fires within his own heart. Their bond, forged in the heat of the smithy and tested in the crucible of adversity, transcended age, circumstance, and the petty judgments of others. This story celebrates the dignity of craft, the profound satisfaction found in honest labor, in shaping raw material with skill and artistry. Whether it's iron forged in fire or images drawn with charcoal, the act of creation, of bringing something new and meaningful into the world, holds a power that can transform lives, build communities, and leave an enduring mark. Billy's talent, nurtured by Cutler's gruff guidance, became not just a means of survival, but a source of beauty, of connection, of hope, in a town often starved for all three. And it speaks, too, of the courage to stand against injustice, not necessarily with guns and fists, though Cutler certainly showed he was capable of that when pushed, but with integrity, with skill, with an unwavering commitment to one's principles. Cutler and Billy faced down Silas Thorne not by matching his brutality, but by excelling at their craft, by refusing to be broken or bought, by ultimately saving the very enterprise Thorne had tried to use to destroy them. Their victory was a victory of character, of skill over greed, of quiet resilience over blustering power. It's a reminder that potential often lies hidden, waiting for a spark, for a knowing hand, for an opportunity to be revealed. Who would have looked at the small, frightened orphan boy and seen a future master smith, a gifted artist? Who would have seen in the gruff, solitary old blacksmith a fierce protector, a selfless mentor? It urges us to look deeper, to nurture talent wherever we find it, to recognize that true worth often resides not in outward appearance or social standing, but in the fire within the soul. Out here, on the vast stage of the American West, The stories of unlikely partnerships, of hidden talents revealed, of lives transformed by shared purpose and unexpected kindness, are as numerous and as inspiring as the stars in a clear Montana sky. They teach us about the enduring strength of the human spirit, about the bonds that can be forged even in the harshest of circumstances, about the legacies we build not just with our hands, but with our hearts. If this story of Ben Cutler and Billy Parker, of the fire in their forge and the courage in their souls, has warmed your own heart, if it has reminded you of a mentor who shaped your life, or a talent that brought you joy, I invite you to share it. Let their story spark a conversation. We'd be honored to hear your reflections in the comments below. Who was your Ben Cutler? What unexpected talents have you discovered in yourself or others? And as always, if you find value in these journeys into our shared past, these voices of justice that celebrate the resilience, the courage, and the enduring humanity found on the frontier, please do subscribe. We'll keep the forge lit and the stories coming. Until next time, friends, may you recognize the hidden talents around you. May you have the courage to nurture the fire within yourself and others, and may you always find strength and purpose in the work of your hands and the bonds of your heart. This is your narrator, wishing you strong anvils, bright fires, and the satisfaction of a job well done. Good night. 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 Good night.